Hi everyone, welcome back to Tattered Stitch Embroideries. We have a really fun tutorial today. This idea has been kind of rolling around in my head for a while and I finally digitized it and have created a tutorial for it, but we're going to go over how to chenille quilt blocks. Okay, so I just wanted to start off by telling you that today we're going to do the 6x6 inch block. So I went ahead and I cut my fabric to be about 7.5 inches squared, and then I did the same thing with batting. And then a little bit later on we're going to go ahead and we're going to lay down our fabric for the chenilling process. So I've got 3 squares of fabric, nice cotton, already pre-cut. And then also we're going to be using this tool to fluff up our edges later on. And then not here, because I don't have one, but we will be showing you the tool to use when you're going to cut for the chenilling. We're going to start off by running our placement stitch. And so for the purpose of this video, I'm just using a cutaway stabilizer. I wanted to point that out, but what I would recommend for making quilt blocks is actually maybe wash and gone, but definitely most likely soft and stay. So I've taken my first block here of batting and I've laid it over my placement stitch. It's a little hard to see because I used a light tone thread, but I'm going to lay it all the way over my placement stitch, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place my fabric square down. I'm going to tape both pieces into place. Whenever I'm working on blocks, I'm always sure to float my fabric. I don't like to hoop it. I find that things stay in place better when I float and tape. So now we're going to run our tack down stitch. Okay, now we're just going to go ahead and embroider out the details of the border. Okay, so you can see my border is fully stitched out. So now I'm going to lay my 3 pieces of cotton fabric. I trimmed them so that they'd be about 1 inch bigger than the center block right here. So they overlap so that I can cut away later. So 3 panels of cotton fabric. I'm going to tape everything into place and I'm going to run my tack down stitch. Okay, so with the tack down in place, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to trim away the excess material. I'm going to trim right up to the stitch line as closely as I can. So when the satin stitch runs over this, it's nice and neat. Once this is trimmed, we're going to embroider our main pattern and then the satin stitch in the center of this block. Okay, so now that we've cut our fabric, I just wanted to mention real quick that now we're going to embroider the rings. That's going to be the chenille portion of this block, and then we're going to embroider the main flower and then the satin stitching that goes around that flower. Also, just to note, for this step with the rings, I'm going to stitch in a color thread even though I'm using white background here. I'm doing that so that you can see the rings as they're stitching out, but if you're actually to make this block on your own, I would recommend matching the thread up to the fabric. Okay, so we have gone ahead and we've stitched out the rings on this panel. I just wanted to make a quick note that this stitch right here is going to get fully cut away before you start trimming the insides of your rings. And we'll get to that a little bit later, but I did want to point out that this stitching right here will get trimmed away. It's basically a basting stitch. Now we're going to embroider our pattern. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to stitch out the satin stitching for the center ring and then for the outer square here. Okay, so this is the part where we're going to go ahead and we're just going to trim this away, or cut it away I should say, because we don't really need it. It's just to help everything stitch out all in one continuous stitch out. See it well enough to cut it, there we go. Once we get this started, it'll just kind of pull out. Alright, so if I had the tool, we would be using our chenille cutting tool right now, but I don't have that. I'm just going to use my scissors and show you how to go ahead and cut down through the layers. So I'm just going to start, I'll start on the outer circle first, and I'm going to catch one piece of fabric with my scissors, and I'm going to cut right in the center of that. Then I'm going to come down another layer, and I'm going to catch that with my scissors. A little easier said than done. And I'm going to cut that. And then I've got one more layer before you get to the purple layer. It's really hard to see, but I've got that last layer. I'm going to cut this last layer of fabric, and I'm going to be sure not to catch the purple fabric, because I want that perfect purple fabric whole and intact. And then I'm going to catch all 3 layers now, and I'm going to trim them, or cut them all at once, all the way around. And I'm going to repeat the process for all of my circles, of my rings here. All the way around. Staying as close to the center as I can. Alright, so I've cut through all my layers, and the cool thing about this is when this is all chenilled, this fabric underneath is going to show through. And I've got my chenilling brush out, and I'm just going to start brushing the edges. And you kind of have to really work this and get everything really good and fluffy. And you just keep working it. And I would also recommend that as you're making these blocks, I wouldn't hold off on doing the chenilling to the very end with all these blocks, because that would be an awful lot, and it does get a little painful after a while. So, as you're stitching these, I would recommend just taking a half hour each night and fluffing these up. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I have fluffed everything up. As you can see, when the fabric moves, you can kind of see the underneath purple fabric showing through. And I think that as you put the blocks together and you quilt it, the whole thing would just be absolutely gorgeous, especially when the blanket moves around and you use it nice and soft and fluffy. Well, that wraps up today's video. We really hope that you enjoy and that you get something out of this.